So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Sam Dudley, and we're here to talk about amateur footage, user-generated content, and how that is used in news output and some of the challenges that we face with that. We're talking about research that myself and my colleague here, Claire Wardle, and our research assistant, Pete Brown, have conducted for the Tau Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University. We were very lucky to be funded by the Tau Center to conduct a 9-month research into how user-generated content has been used by news channels, both online and on air. And that's brought forward a lot of challenges, a lot of questions, for which we've brought this panel together. What do we mean by user-generated content? Often people get a little bit confused by that, what we mean. We mean, as it says on the screen there, photographs and videos captured by people unrelated to the newsroom, so accidental journalists, people who would not describe themselves particularly as professional journalists. And we're talking very much about the challenges that brings to editors, to the newsroom, in terms of discovery, verification, ethics, and, from our colleague Matteo here, legal. First of all, can I ask everybody on the panel just to introduce themselves? I'll start with Claire on the right here.
So my name's Claire Wardle, and I worked on the research with Sam. I previously trained about 3,000 journalists around the world in social news gathering and verification, and I used to work for the social media news agency Storyful.
Caroline?
I'm Caroline Bannock, and I work for The Guardian, and I look after the user-generated content platform, which is called Guardian Witness.
And Fergus?
I'm Fergus Bell. I work for the Associated Press. I'm social media and user-generated content editor, and I oversee verification at the AP.
And Matteo.
Sono Matteo Iori, sono un avvocato che mi rendo conto non essere una delle presentazioni più simpatiche possibile. Se preferite insegno diritto delle nuove tecnologie e comunicazione digitale all'Università di Milano.
So as you see, a very experienced panel of people who have a lot to do with user-generated content, both editorially and, as we'll hear a lot from Matteo, legally, which brings forward a lot of questions that, well, scared us when we were talking about it, and I think will give you a lot of food for thought. Just to give you a brief overview of exactly what Claire and I and Pete did for the research. Between the 25th of November and the 15th of December last year, we recorded 8 24-hour news channels, 8 hours a day for 21 days. We had a rhythm of recording it from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, from 4 till midnight, and from midnight to 8. We did this as best we could, so that meant me at home getting up at 3 in the morning to check the recordings were working, which was never very fun, to make sure that they didn't fall over. They did fall over sometimes, so we didn't get a full 3 weeks, but we did watch 1,164 hours of content. And we labeled that to see exactly how much user-generated content, so content from people who wouldn't describe themselves as journalists, were used in news bulletins. This gave us a lot of data, which we obviously analyzed, and we released our first report last week into the quantitative side of this research. And also we analyzed, of those 8 channels, global channels with an international audience, international perspective, we also analyzed their websites. So we analyzed only 5 days because there was so much content on the websites, but of those 5 days of that time period, we analyzed 2,254 web pages. So we have a very broad set of data from those 8 channels that we've been able to analyze. And we'll go into some of those findings through that. Claire will talk us through that later in this session. And then we've also, over the last 3 months, conducted 64 interviews with news editors, foreign editors, heads of news, reporters, journalists, from 64 people from 38 news organizations across the globe, based in 24 different countries. So we've really tried with this research, rather than to focus on the United States, UK axis, which kind of news research tends to do, we've tried to broaden this as wide as possible. So we spoke to people from Iceland, we spoke to people from Indonesia, Iraq, we spoke to people from Pakistan, from Singapore. So we've really, as well as the UK and the big channels, including people on this table, to get their views on UGC. And one of the things that really came out of it, and this is why we selected this quote on the screen, is 7 people independently talked about UGC being a Wild West. That news organizations really didn't know what to do with UGC necessarily, and that all the parameters, guidelines needed to be rethought and looked at. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask Claire to talk us through this first part of the research in which we looked at discovery of UGC in particular.
So you can only use user-generated content when you find it. And it used to be that people would send content to newsrooms. But now, because of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, people are just sharing with their friends, which means that newsrooms have to go and find that content. And if any of you do that work, you know it means sitting in front of TweetDeck, it means trawling through Facebook. It is very time-consuming. So many newsrooms we talked to said, we actually don't do it in-house. It takes too much time. So lots of smaller newsrooms overwhelmingly rely on the agencies, whether that's Reuters, Associated Press, or smaller social media agencies like Storyful. There is an interesting question about a UGC hub. So the BBC has a special unit that just deals with user-generated money. So other newsrooms would say, we could never have that. But we did find that in certain newsrooms, they would have maybe one person who spoke Arabic, who would be the person trawling through YouTube trying to find Syria content. So the question of workflow was very interesting. Who finds this and what do they do with it? But there was a lot of emphasis on, we just have to rely on the agencies. And there's one foreign editor said, well, we pay them, so yeah, they can do the work for us. But what was also interesting is that people were using agencies as an insurance policy, which was, one thing is finding it, but the other thing is verifying it. And that takes time, and we just don't have the time. Whereas if we rely on the agencies, that's an insurance policy for us because we can say, oh, we didn't find it, we didn't verify it. So the role of agencies was incredibly important from this research. The agencies are playing a huge role when it comes to user-generated content.
And Fergus, you're the UGC person for AP, one of the biggest television news agencies, one of the big 2 television news agencies. I mean, you've got the quote here from a senior foreign editor. Sorry, this is a foreign editor from one of the agencies. They want us to be the insurance policy. Is that something you find and you agree with?
I mean, I'm not really sure how much I would consider myself an insurance policy. We're doing the best that we can. It's not easy for us either. I mean, we do put a lot of work into it, a lot of resources, and we've set up workflows to make it doable every day. Because we're an agency and we're business to business, we're newsroom to newsroom, all of our stuff has to stand up every time. It can't be withdrawn, it can't be embedded. Everything that we do is rights cleared and goes out. So because of that, and that's following traditional agency model, because we have to follow that model, I think customers can rely on what we're giving them, and that's what they do.
And you set up quite a big, if we were to focus particularly on UGC that you found for Syria, which I think you've invested quite a lot of time, you set up quite a big workflow for discovering that content, right? Could you just talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So the way that we discover content from Syria is we don't have anyone in Syria who can do this, so we rely on AP's Beirut Bureau and London staff, which is the main home for video. We are sourcing UGC from Syria all the time. We are not the experts. We do not know, we don't speak Arabic, but we do know how to find video. We're then communicating with Beirut staff who are translating signs, captions, any audio in any of the videos to build up a use case, a verification case for that. And so we're working with all of the resources we have, and that's probably because, we have those resources because we are an agency.
Yeah. And the quote we had before, if I just put that up on the screen, it's, through you is the best way of getting UGC that someone else has done the work for you. Is that something you get a lot from your clients, or is that?
I know from feedback that people do trust us, and they do. If they get it from us, then it's true. It's verified 100%. They are not expecting any any doubt. And they've asked us to give extra information, which we now do, so that they can cross-reference with whatever verification meets their newsroom standards.
And was there a kind of, what was the catalyst for you investing so much in UGC? I mean, was it Syria? Was it something before? Was it demand from your clients? Was it, how did that work come around?
I personally started doing UGC full time. It was January the 25th, which was the uprising, the kind of first day of organised protest in Egypt. We were doing it because that's where the news was breaking. It's as simple as that. News was breaking through social media. User-generated content was the way of showing the story, and we have to be where the story is.
Okay. And with that, I mean, has there been an increased demand from your clients, not just from those hotspot regions, but is there a question of, is there UGC from other stories as well, like more human interest, more?
I'm not sure that you can kind of quantify it in that way. If there is a UGC story, then we're expected to be on it.
Okay. I mean, Caroline, you've got a slightly different perspective at Guardian Witness. Could you just talk us around, what the goal of Guardian Witness is, why it was set up, that kind of thing?
The Guardian is very much about community. It's got a long history and tradition of working with people and building communities. And so we wanted a platform that was going to enable communities to share content with us, and that's video, image, and text. So we send out call-outs for people to share their content. And so it's slightly different from Fergus. Sometimes we're looking for stuff. If we see a very good piece on Twitter, we'll verify it. But otherwise, all the content comes into us. And actually, for Syria, we realised it was very difficult to get UGC that we wanted. So we set up an assignment that was aimed at aid workers to share content about Syrian refugees. So we do things very differently, and sometimes we target communities rather than just anything that appears.
So it's not so much about discovery for you, it's about identifying a story and then
finding ways to get people to hear about that story so they can share the content with us if they want to. And they do want to. And I think they want to because they trust what we do with it. And the interesting thing about Guardian Witness is it's embedded into the Guardian CMS, so that when the content comes into us, we can very, very easily use it in the Guardian's journalism.
And can you give some examples of where that's worked, or where that's been a real success? Somebody's contributed something to Guardian Witness, and then it's been a real lead on your main news site.
Yeah, the week after we launched, it was Margaret Thatcher's funeral, which was a big people story in the UK, as you would imagine. And we were quite a little bit nervous. We thought we were going to get anything from anybody, but we're going to set it up anyway. We got a lot of content from people in London sharing images of the funeral cortege going past. But then we got this amazing image from Edinburgh, which showed an empty screen. And this is what UGC is about for us. It's about the many perspectives of a story. And that's what's so interesting. A journalist in London can tell one story about what happened at Thatcher's funeral, but we want the perspectives, the multiple perspectives. And that one picture showing exactly what people in other parts of the country felt about Thatcher's funeral, i.e. they possibly didn't care about it, was shared on Twitter. It went absolutely viral. So I think that's important for us, is different parts of the story.
That's something I think we found in the research, didn't we, Claire? People talking about not being able to be there, and that's a real benefit.
Yeah, AP obviously has many bureaus around the world. Many news organisations would say we can't be everywhere all the time. And increasingly, this isn't about citizen journalists, this is about accidental journalists. This is about people who happen to be somewhere with a smartphone, but they've never sent anything to anybody before, but they are the first person at a crash or an explosion or a tornado. And so they're sharing this content. And most newsrooms 5 years ago were quite dismissive about user-generated content. Now they would say, why would we say no? The best pictures of a breaking news event are mostly coming from people who happen to be there with smartphones or with cameras. And so that's quite a big shift in quite a short space of time.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next section, Fergus, Caroline, if I could just ask you, for organisations that might be thinking of, hiring somebody for the first time to look at this stuff, to really putting their toe in the water for the first time, I mean, you kicked it off at AP Focus. I mean, what would you recommend for them to do in terms of discovery? How would you go about it?
I think the most important thing is to know exactly what you want to cover. You can't cover everything. You can't be across everything. There are going to be stories that are important to you. If you work out the workflows and the systems for doing that for the stories that you are interested in, you can scale it up at any time. I think that's really important. But I do also think that it's important to do it for yourself, because then you're going to get something that no one else has. Even in my newsroom, I don't tell my colleagues who I'm following on Twitter, because I'm already following those people. I want my colleagues to be following other people so that we're getting it from different sources. And I think that can be applied anywhere.
I'd say training. I think when I started Guardian Witness, I thought, well, I'm a journalist, I've done lots of things, I've worked on foreign desk, but actually, it was Claire Wardle who came into our newsroom, actually, and you don't really know what you need to look for until you're told what to look for. So I'd say really good training. Make sure you're aware of all the tools at your disposal when you're actually starting out.
Okay, that's lovely. So, I mean, this was some of the things that came out of the discovery side of it. Obviously, the discovery is kind of the easy bit. It's like, once you've found it, what do you do with it? And this is, Matteo's been sitting there quietly at the moment. We'll come to Matteo very shortly because he's going to scare us all, I promise you. We're all talking about the glorious world of UGC, and Matteo's going to bring us back down to earth quite quickly, as we'll hear. And one of the biggest challenges we found when we were talking to all these news organizations, again and again and again and again, was verification. How do we know it's true? And Claire, do you want to just talk us through what we found in terms of verification?
Yeah, so I deliberately chose this photo because this photo was shared during Hurricane Sandy. And lots of people talk about verification, about, there are people out there trying to hoax us. That's not really the main problem. Often it's just either people are trying to help you, so they'll send you content and say, this is of today's tornado, and it was actually last month's tornado. This photo was shared widely, but it was actually taken 1 month before Hurricane Sandy, when there was a huge rainstorm at Arlington Cemetery. An amateur photographer took this photo, uploaded it to Flickr, and it got shared widely and widely. It was raining in Arlington Cemetery. This isn't a hoax, but it was not of Hurricane Sandy. So verification is a very difficult process. And in our interviews, what was in forensic verification, how can you really use technical checks to make sure that what you're looking at is true? And many, many journalists I spoke to had no awareness of those checks that they should be running. And they would often say, I've been doing this for 30 years. It's all about gut instinct. And yes, there is some gut instinct, but actually, have you geolocated this? Have you done a reverse image search? Have you looked at EXIF data? Have you looked at those checks to ensure this? And most importantly, have you spoken to the uploader and said, did you take newsrooms aren't doing, or they just don't even know that they should be doing it? So this is a quote from somebody who remained nameless. Verification is always an afterthought. It's sort of like, let's just get it on air and online and then not worry about it. When someone puts something forward in an editorial meeting, I'll say, have you verified it? And people groan. People are scared of the V word. They know it's going to take a long time. And that's true, verification takes a long time, but journalism has always been about fact-checking. This is just slightly different fact-checking.
I mean, how do you find that at AP, Fergus? I mean, could you just talk through your verification procedures, how you go about it? You found a piece of UGC, great, in Beirut. What do you do with it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would just say that I don't believe verification does always take a long time. It's all about setting yourself up to be able to do it. It's all about, integrating workflows and make sure it happens, and getting, the quickest verification happens on a breaking story when someone still has the device in their hand. And so if you jump on it late, then I guess it does take a long time. Our workflows for verification, our approach, I'll try and say it as quickly as possible. We have a two-track verification process, which basically means we verify the source and we verify the content, and we do that separately. That means, essentially, that, yes, we know that this person took this photo, but what we're not saying is they know what they took that photo of or that video of. We are going to separately verify the event. And that has worked well for us. In the case of Syria, We know that we know where we're getting the content from, we know who is taking it, but we don't take their word for it that that event happened in the way that they're describing, so we are going to cross-reference it with our own reporting. We do that for everything. A lot of it has been built around our experience in Syria, but we equally know that if a plane goes down in Cleveland, Ohio, the same process needs to work for that, so we're always thinking about that.
And Caroline, I mean, you're building a community, right? So you don't really have to bother because people are sending the stuff in.
People like to help, as Claire said, and there are times when they help by sharing images that have been passed around the internet. So yeah, we actually, everything we do is pre-moderated. Nothing goes out without us doing simple checks. And our workflow is very similar to Fergus. Yes, it's one half of it is the content. The other most important thing, I think Fergus might agree with me on this, is actually speaking to that person, getting a real sense of that person. But there's always an element of doubt. I don't know if you agree with that. I mean, I think 99% you think this is absolutely fine, this image, but I wouldn't ever like to say 100%.
I would never say 100% because people are getting better at gaming the system, but if I had a serious doubt, I would never want to put anything out because I don't think there's any value in an audience getting something that's partially verified.
I completely agree, and I think it's about trust, and I think there's so many people out there trying to do the same thing, that you want people to come to you because you get it right, not that you get there first.
And there are two elements, as you say, about the verification. Yes, that event happened, and that might be a photo or a video from that event, but from my point of view, I also need to be sure that it's not a scrape and that we're using the content that comes from the person that we have been able to identify.
Absolutely.
But if I'm a bulletin editor, I'm in the gallery, I'm seeing my competitor running with this, or you're seeing Reuters running with it, surely you've got to put it out there, right?
No. We never feel that we have to put something out just because someone else is running it. We're very confident with our verification process now. It has never let us down. We've never had to withdraw UGC. We've never made a mistake on UGC. And that's because we have the checks. Other people have made mistakes, and I would rather get it out a little bit slower, but people have absolute trust in it rather than try and match something.
Okay. I hope we haven't made any mistakes. I don't know of any mistakes. But I think, as Fergus is saying, you've just got to do as many checks as you can and be as sure as you can.
Coming to you, Matteo. What do you think about verification? I mean, we were talking last night, and you mentioned an EU directive which scared us. Could you just tell us a little bit about the responsibilities news organizations have in putting out UGC and in the verification process?
Sì, dunque, user-generated content rappresentano certamente una fonte di contenuti e di notizie estremamente preziosa che solo qualche anno fa non era immaginabile. Ovviamente l'aumento di contenuti comporta inevitabilmente anche un aumento del rumore, okay? Dell'attività di verifica che è richiesta per scremare contenuti attendibili e contenuti non attendibili. Certamente non si può, a mio avviso, ritenere che un broadcaster, un network che riporta una notizia, indipendentemente da quale sia la fonte, magari un giornalista non professionista, non è possibile immaginare che il broadcaster che poi ridistribuisce questa notizia non assuma delle responsabilità, che potremmo dire così genericamente editoriali, per il fatto di aver diffuso questa comunicazione. Sotto questo punto di vista, peraltro, apro un inciso molto rapido, non ritengo che mi è capitato molto spesso di vedere quelle diciture sopra filmati che riportano frasi del tipo questo contenuto non è stato elaborato dalla redazione di questa testata ma è un contenuto amatoriale. Non ritengo che questi tipi di disclaimer, se così vogliamo chiamarli, possano giuridicamente esplicare un vero e proprio effetto di esclusione o di responsabilità in capo a chi ridistribuisce poi il contenuto. L'attività di verifica di cui parlavano i colleghi, peraltro io ho studiato la ricerca che hanno fatto Claire e Sam e la trovo veramente fantastica dal punto di vista dell'attività che hanno svolto. Io sono molto lieto di apprendere che ci sia questa serietà, questo approccio molto rigoroso nella verifica dei contenuti. D'altra parte, chiacchieravamo ieri sera, c'è anche da considerare che se vogliamo questo aspetto che può essere un po' paradossale, ma poi di fatto non lo è, e cioè che maggiore è l'attività di verifica, di selezione, di editing dei contenuti, maggiore paradossalmente è anche l'assunzione di responsabilità che si prende chi poi ridistribuisce questi contenuti. Noi abbiamo questa direttiva comunitaria, una direttiva sul commercio elettronico, la direttiva 31 del 2000, che sappiamo è stata diverse volte impiegata per escludere profili di responsabilità in capo a delle piattaforme di ridistribuzione dei contenuti che agiscono in maniera completamente neutrale. Sulla base di questa direttiva, gli articoli 12 e 15 di questa direttiva, sono stati esclusi i profili di responsabilità in capo a piattaforme quali YouTube, eBay, diversi altri tipi di social network, nel momento in cui la loro attività è un'attività come dire, di mero conduttore della notizia, di mero ripetitore della notizia. Nel momento in cui una piattaforma non fa selezione, non fa verifica, ma agisce in maniera completamente neutra per quanto riguarda i contenuti che caricano gli utenti, in base a questa direttiva comunitaria non si può attribuire alcun profilo di responsabilità in base al gestore di questa piattaforma. Paradossalmente, dicevamo, nel momento in cui chi gestisce una piattaforma che ridistribuisce user-generated content applica invece un processo di verifica attento, un processo che peraltro io condivido, che ritengo che debba essere svolto, ebbene questo tipo di verifica poi comporta anche un'assunzione di responsabilità in capo a questo soggetto che non potrà poi, come dire, valersi dell'esimente prevista dalla normativa comunitaria che esclude la responsabilità nel momento in cui questo tipo di verifica, questa attività editoriale non c'è. Poi per quanto invece si diceva in relazione all'impossibilità di arrivare sempre a una verifica del 100% dell'accuratezza della notizia, certamente sappiamo che questo è quasi impossibile in molti casi, ma non è questo che la legge richiede, nel senso che il concetto di verità putativa della notizia presuppone il fatto che non vi sia una vera e propria responsabilità nel momento in cui relativamente a quella notizia si possa dimostrare un accertamento della verità efficace, uno studio approfondito circa la veridicità della notizia. Se poi in un secondo momento la notizia si dovesse dovesse risultare non completamente corretta, ebbene questo tipo di attività esclude comunque una responsabilità in capo a chi ridistribuisce la notizia.
So, scary stuff, no? Yeah. News organizations.
With great power comes great responsibility, I think. I don't think it's scary. I think it's a challenge that we need to face up to. I think I'm happy to face up to it. I'm excited to face up to it. I think it's the way forward, and I think it's what an audience will expect going on.
I mean, but has your news organization been aware of this, thought about this?
I'm not sure I've been aware of this law.
I wasn't aware of it. I found it quite scary when I first heard about it.
I mean, organically, through our process, we have eliminated the phrase, this UGC has not been independently verified. That phrase does not exist across any of AP's formats any longer.
Okay. Why did you make that decision?
Because we don't report rumour. And an unverified YouTube video is essentially what was rumour to a text reporter. And the AP doesn't report in rumour. We're not going to report on video that is essentially rumour until it's been verified.
And I think it's very heartening that actually if you are actually doing those checks and you are taking verification seriously, then that will actually help you in a court of law should it ever get to that point. So I think just that point alone should make newsrooms kind of sit up and listen and think, we really need to take verification very seriously.
I mean, Claire, do you want to reflect on that in terms of, what we found from the research in terms of, people riding a little bit roughshod over verification maybe? And what they should learn from what Matteo just said? Yeah,
I think it's partly ignorance, so people don't know the technical checks they can do, so they rely on this idea of gut instinct. I don't think it's willful ignorance. I think it's changed so quickly, and I'll say this, many news managers, since the last time they were on a breaking news desk, it's been 10 years or 5 years. So they haven't actually been at a point of verifying a tweet in a breaking news situation. So when you talk to the managers about verification, they'll fall back on gut instinct. But actually, if they had to do a news shift like Fergus, I think they would very quickly listen to Matteo and say, good God, this is very difficult. Or not, you know, if you're fresh to this, I think it is a shift in the way that you do discovery.
Just because something's difficult, though, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Exactly, Fergus. You tell your son that.
I think legally you definitely need to do it. I think it goes beyond that. I don't know whether Matteo agrees with that, but it sounds like.
Yeah, would you agree with that, Matteo?
Sì, assolutamente.
Yeah. For people out there who maybe have never, thought about verification of UGC before and the steps you might take apart from looking at it and saying, that doesn't look right, or, oh, that's definitely right. Could you give, what are the first things, I mean, Claire, maybe as you've done a lot of training on this, what are the first things maybe people should look for?
I mean, I think if you don't know about Google reverse image search, that's the first thing you should do. So on Google Images, there's a little camera icon, upload the picture and see whether it has appeared anywhere else on the web previously. And often with weather events, it is an old photo, and you can very quickly say no. And then you can stop all other checks. So reverse image search is one of the most important. But also really understand the different social networks. So on Twitter, for example, when somebody geolocates their tweet and it says from Perugia, if you click on that, you'll actually get an arrow to this building. On Facebook, you should know that people can actually choose where they are. They just get a drop-down menu about their geolocation. So it's really important to know the different platforms and what the tricks and tips are for the different platforms. Because if you don't know that, you can't verify. You need to know how those different platforms operate.
Anything in addition to that from you guys?
I prefer to get into the heads of the people who are uploading. So I like to think, okay, if this is a Justin Bieber concert and something's happened, I need to be looking at certain social networks. I need to be looking for certain language. If I see something that's clearly been uploaded with keywords, with, to be found by the media, then I'm going to steer away from that. That's not something that seems original. So I like to, and again, looking at, could that person have been in that place at that time? Coupled with the technical stuff that Claire talks about, I think we talk about building up a case for the verification of the UGC, and getting in the heads and the technical tests are both part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's seeing what else they're doing on social media is really important. What agenda do they have? Were they at this place at the right time? Did that event happen at that time? And I think we do trek with sort of reporters on the ground, with people on the ground that we trust to see those things happen. But it's very important to try and work out who this person is, and it's definitely important to speak to this person if you can. So you get a huge sense of who they are from speaking to them.
I mean, one of the things that came up a lot in some of the conversations I had with quite senior people was that they weren't sure. Somebody had uploaded a video or a photograph to YouTube or Instagram or whatever, and they often said, yeah, they upload it, but we don't know if it's theirs. Is that something you've come across? You contact the person, you do all the verification steps, but then we don't actually know that that's the right video.
Before I contact anyone, I'm almost certain that they are the owner by doing checks on social history. What have they uploaded in the past? If it's a weather event, are they someone who sits in their bedroom uploading videos, scraping and uploading videos of weather events? You can tell by looking at other accounts that they have as well, what kind of person they are, where they've been, have they shared anything else. That gives a very clear indication. And then of course when you reach out to get permission for that video, they will say, oh well, it's mine or it's not mine. Occasionally I've got to a point where they've said, actually, it's not mine, but it's my friend, and I shared it, yeah. which kind of added up because they were in the same place. But I think nowadays to not know where it's coming from, I mean, that's a major part of the verification anyway, and I think you've got a big gap if you're putting something out and you don't know where it's come from.
Yeah, I just think that's the point, is that if you can't build up that picture, you shouldn't be publishing, actually.
And Claire, you got quite excited last week, I think, by the new Twitter profiles, didn't you? There were some interesting changes there.
Yes, so Twitter profiles, there was always the issue that people could Photoshop the blue verification tick onto the header on Twitter. And so you'd have to scroll over your mouse and it would come up and say verified account. On the new Twitter profiles, they've cleverly moved the blue tick down to a white background, so you now can't Photoshop a blue tick. You can on mobile, but you can't on a desktop. But they've also done the date that somebody joined Twitter. So if somebody only joined Twitter last week and they've just been tweeting furiously, don't trust them. So there's, if you keep on top of the social platforms, they are trying to make these changes. But I just very quickly want to talk about scrapes, because we've used this phrase, and many people don't understand what this means. On any big breaking news event, sometimes you can have 400 to 500 copies of that YouTube video on YouTube. And often the original video doesn't have very many views, but it gets picked up by often an 8-year-old boy in Portugal. He takes it down, re-uploads it, and gets lots and lots of hits on it. Journalists go, oh, that must be the original. But scraping, which is taking down content and re-uploading it onto your account, is a huge, huge problem. So before anybody does any verification checks, it's exactly as Fergus says. No point verifying it if you're not working with the correct uploader. So that's something I would really stress.
And those steps we've just talked about, Matteo, do you think they cover what you're talking about legally? Is that if you do those steps, and in terms of, what you're saying about responsibility, and if then something turns out to be false, that would stand up, right?
Sì, assolutamente. Io veramente sono molto felicemente sorpreso sorpreso anche, non dovrei dirlo, ma non credo effettivamente che tutti operino con questo rigore e mi auguro che invece questi tipi di linee guida, questo tipo di approccio alla gestione degli user generated content sia veramente condiviso. Oggi sono sotto il profilo giuridico degli ottimi e efficacissimi esimenti di responsabilità.
That's great, thank you. So verification, very important, also quite hard, as we found out. So you go through all the hard bit, let's say, and then we kind of get to the permissions and crediting. So you've spoken to the person, you know who they are, you've got their YouTube account, everything. So the next bit should be quite easy, right, Claire?
So we expected that broadcasters would understand rights. So here's a screenshot from the Woolwich incident in London, and you can see there that this is actually a screenshot from the BBC, but they understand that they need to credit the Sun newspaper. Broadcasters understand rights. However, when it comes to UGC, that's not actually the case. So this is a quote from quite a senior member of staff who says, "We don't credit Reuters, we don't credit AP's pictures, so why would we credit user-generated content when there is no requirement for us to do so?" Now, if that person was in the room here with Matteo, he would say, "You are very wrong. There is a requirement for you to do that." So one of the reasons that we watched so much TV, which was very difficult, was to count how many times things were credited. And if you could change the slide, Sam. Only 16% of the UGC that we looked at had any credit added by the broadcaster, which was, I knew it would be, I was going to go for about 50%, but I was shocked at 16%. And there is a difference, to be honest. CNN, the number was about 50%. The BBC was 9%. So very poor crediting practices when it comes to these large newsrooms. And what's interesting, actually, is if you work with uploaders, it's not really about payment. Mostly it's about attribution. They just want somebody to recognize that they were the person at the breaking news event. Some people want money, but mostly it's about attribution, which makes it even more crazy. And also, broadcasters do understand that they need to seek permission. So, for example, if there was a plane crash that landed over there, lots of journalists would go onto Twitter, they would find photos, and they would say, "Hi, I'm from the BBC. Hi, I'm from CNN. Can we use your picture?" Journalists know to ask for permission, but that isn't turning into a credit, which, as Matteo says, is slightly odd. They've done the hard work, but it's not turning into a credit. And the other point we wanted to make is that there is a difference between crediting Claire Wardle or Sam Doubley and labelling it and describing that it is user-generated content. So in news, we talk about transparency. And actually, we were surprised that lots of user-generated content was not described as such. It just was vision. It was just put out there. And so the audience didn't necessarily know that it wasn't filmed by a camera that was owned by the broadcaster. And as we know, our smartphones are getting smarter. Some of the user-generated content now looks pretty professional. So we were surprised that so few had examples that said amateur footage or activist video. And of course, there is a big difference between different types of user-generated content. So if I'm a bystander to a news event, I'm just an eyewitness. If I'm an activist in Syria, I'm an activist. If I work for UNHCR in Syria, and on my UNHCR iPhone I'm taking pictures of refugees crossing over the Jordanian border, is that user-generated content? So there is an issue around transparency of being very clear with the audience who you are and what your agenda is. And that level of transparency is not being shared with the audience at the moment. So in our study, 72% of UGC during our study was not given a description. Al Jazeera recently have made the decision that whenever they use activist video from Syria, they will call it activist video, but that's a recent decision by Al Jazeera. So you're seeing these things changing all the time as broadcasters are recognizing they need to be more transparent.
And what do those statistics make you think?
We actually, at The Guardian, we care about accrediting. We think it's very important. We think it's actually a moral responsibility that we actually make sure that people are accredited for the content they give us and they need to trust us. We actually have built into our CMS you credit the author who gives a title and a description, and that is intact put into our journalism. So that you know where it comes from, you know it's user-generated content because it has guard and witness furniture on it. And I think it just makes it much clearer to the audience where this stuff comes from. And I agree with Claire completely. You need to know if it's a UNHCR worker or you need to know if it's a refugee. Those differences need to be there, and we completely agree it needs to happen.
We also have a fairly robust crediting system at the AP. Most of the UGC that we source goes out to broadcast customers and actually across all formats with a mandatory credit, unless someone requests to be anonymous, in which case it has to be in line with AP's anonymity policy, which is quite robust as well. We give as much information and as transparent as possible about the sourcing and the verification. So across all formats now, when video or photos that are UGC are referenced, the verification must be in there. So in a storyline in text, it must say, this video was uploaded to a video site, or it appeared genuine based on this and this and this. We feel that the more information we can get, the more full the picture is.
But your clients obviously aren't paying any attention to this.
We can't force people to do things. We say mandatory credit. Ultimately, we think that we need to respect the people who are uploading. We do not like it when people take our content. We don't like, especially if they're not crediting us for it. We don't want to do the same to other people. I don't think that's right. These are legitimate content creators capturing incredible imagery, and we have to respect that.
And we wouldn't do it to a photojournalist. We wouldn't do it to one of our colleagues. So why are we doing it to anybody else? And I think that's where we've got to think about it. Why is their content not worth as much as our colleagues?
Sorry, also because moving forward, this is the currency that we're working with when we're dealing with citizen journalism, with accidental journalists. We have to give people fair treatment so that they want to deal with us in the future when they're in the right place at the right time.
I mean, I'll come to your thoughts on this in a second, Matteo, but we spoke to somebody who was very senior in rights, who tries to push this in one organization. And that person's opinion was, the journalists think this is all bullshit. They think it's management bollocks, and they think rights people are trying to stifle their creativity. And the person went on to say that actually their greatest fear was people would carry on ignoring this, ignoring the crediting, and it would lead to a situation where people wouldn't be allowed to use UGC in the future, and in fact remove it from the journalistic domain, if you like. I mean, do you think that that's something we should be very concerned about, Matteo?
Sì, assolutamente. Dunque, il 16%, mi pare che Claire parlasse del 16% di crediting, è pochissimo. Il riconoscimento di paternità, l'attribuzione della paternità di un contenuto è fondamentale. I profili di proprietà intellettuale connessi all'utilizzo degli user-generated content sono molti e sono piuttosto complessi, però sicuramente il riconoscimento di paternità è un'esigenza primaria. Peraltro, come giustamente è stato sottolineato, l'indicazione la distinzione fra labeling e crediting, cioè l'indicazione semplicemente di questo è un user-generated content, ovviamente non assolve giuridicamente a un riconoscimento di paternità, un'attribuzione di paternità del contenuto che invece deve indicare precisamente la fonte, salvo, come è stato giustamente detto, che sia la fonte stessa a preferire come dire, l'anonimato. Sono rimasto abbastanza sorpreso dall'apprendere, leggendo questa ricerca, che nella stragrande maggioranza dei casi viene effettivamente richiesto il consenso, cioè il trasferimento del diritto di utilizzo del contenuto, ma poi in un successivo momento invece non viene perfezionato il crediting, che è una cosa abbastanza particolare. Nel svolgimento della mia attività professionale sono molti più i casi nei quali manca la richiesta del consenso nell'utilizzo del contenuto, ma quando questa richiesta viene ottenuta poi viene. È un profilo abbastanza particolare. Poi un'altra questione piuttosto delicata è quella relativa anche alle modalità attraverso le quali il crediting viene effettuato. Deve essere completo, devono essere indicate tutta una serie di circostanze. Nella richiesta poi, come diceva prima giustamente Claire, del diritto all'utilizzo del contenuto poi, bisogna stare abbastanza attenti anche alle modalità attraverso le quali il diritto viene trasferito, perché molto spesso le richieste di utilizzo del contenuto alle quali succede poi una risposta affermativa, quindi una trasmissione del diritto, sono molto generiche, e noi sappiamo che in ordinamenti giuridici come il nostro, quelli dell'Europa continentale, in cui la categoria dei diritti morali d'autore è così forte, bisogna stare molto attenti poi a quale tipo di diritto viene trasferito, perché l'utilizzo, un autore può consentire l'utilizzo del proprio contenuto, ma poi quel contenuto deve essere utilizzato nella sua interezza così com'è, con grossi limiti alle possibilità di ritaglio, mashup, cut e editing, formattazione successiva, perché in un secondo momento l'autore potrebbe dire: certo che io ti ho trasferito, ti ho concesso il diritto di utilizzare il mio contenuto, il mio filmato, la mia fotografia, ma tu dovevi utilizzarla esattamente come io l'ho realizzata, non avevi il diritto poi di rielaborarla, perché questo è contrario al mio diritto morale o al mio diritto patrimoniale specifico che non ti ho trasferito. E un altro aspetto che ritengo abbastanza delicato, soprattutto in un'ottica dei prossimi anni, è molto importante anche verificare quale sia il soggetto a cui debba essere indirizzata la richiesta di diritto di utilizzo del contenuto. Molto spesso non è più l'autore del contenuto a detenere i diritti sul contenuto che lui stesso ha realizzato. Molto spesso questi contenuti vengono in un primo momento caricati dall'autore su un'altra piattaforma, su Twitter, su YouTube o su altri servizi, e poi i broadcaster ottengono il contenuto, diciamo, di seconda mano da questi altri fornitori di servizi. Si è discusso molto negli ultimi anni su come YouTube, in una prospettiva per esempio, potrebbe diventare lui stesso un broadcaster di contenuti, e allora bisogna stare attenti a verificare le condizioni di utilizzo di questi servizi, perché se nel momento in cui l'utente si iscrive ad uno di questi servizi, sottoscrive una licenza, che poi è un contratto, attraverso il quale trasferisce i diritti di sfruttamento economico, i diritti patrimoniali sul contenuto che lui ha scattato o ha filmato a questo primo broadcaster, ed eventualmente potrebbe trasferirgli anche i diritti di esclusiva del contenuto, allora è chiaro che poi la richiesta deve essere inoltrata a questo soggetto e non tanto all'autore originale, che poi di fatto non detiene più i diritti patrimoniali e di sfruttamento economico di quel contenuto.
That, I imagine, would be something of a concern to AP, the platforms and...
I think due diligence is very important going forward, and just, I mean, besides all the verification stuff that we've talked about, having an understanding of the business and the business of the platforms and the various gatekeepers that are emerging for those platforms, we need to understand. I was in a situation the other day where we had some UGC coming out of Ukraine, and it was coming from a relatively new social network where people were sharing news. And I had to say, hang on a second, we need to look at the small print here, because we're so used to dealing with this social network and this video platform that actually, if you look at the terms and conditions that people are agreeing to, it doesn't allow us to use it in the same way, which is exactly what I think Matteo was talking about. But that's our responsibility. That's the responsibility of the journalists. We probably need to help educate the people sharing so that they know exactly what they're signing up for. When we get permissions to use things at the AP, we don't. A Twitter permission is never usually enough for us.
Okay. Could you go into that a bit more?
I always take a conversation offline and get official legal wording agreed to. Now, I know that some people don't like to do that because it thinks if you give a user some legal wording to agree to, it will put them off. Well, that might be the case, but if it has to be legally sound. People have to know what they're agreeing to. I mean, we make it less scary by really using legal language that is as friendly as possible, but you can't get around the fact that it is legal. We also rarely ask for exclusive content that's been shared on social because we know it's out there and we know that might put people off as well. So there's so much to think about.
Yeah. Do you think uploaders understand what they're getting into when they agree permissions with you like that? Do you think there's a wide knowledge?
Well, in the same way that when you're signing up for a new phone contract, you might not know exactly what you're agreeing to. I think people don't read the small print. I think it's our responsibility to be as transparent with people about how their content will be used during that process.
And I think, therefore, it's about our relationships with the users and always making sure you've got a good relationship with the user you're working with. That's going to always help you in the long run. It also means, I suppose selfishly, that they'll come back to you if they've had a good experience and they're going to get, and they are wanting more content, then they will come back to you, and it's very important to foster good relationships.
Something that I've learned over the last few days talking to Matteo is that there's this moral issue as well as the kind of hardcore legal issue. The AP is in a weird position outside of the US where not many people know who we are, even though they see our content every day. So I feel it's my responsibility when reaching out to people to explain we are a news agency. We distribute it to people in this customer in your country. Do you understand what this means?
Yeah.
I don't have to do that, but I think morally I have to.
Yeah, and I think when people send stuff to Guardian Witness, they have are actually submitting material. But I think it's always important to tell them and have a conversation with them about exactly where we're going to use it. If we're going to use it in the paper, then we're going to tell them that, and that's a moral responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, you talked a bit before, Caroline, about embedding and the difference between embedding and kind of taking down content and using it. I mean, in our research, do you want to go a bit about that, Claire? Because we found on television people were taking content down, but online they were often embedding it, and there was kind of legal issues around that as well that I'd like Matteo to expand on. But if you could just go explain that difference, Claire, first.
So if any of you in the room work in an online space, you will often probably take the embed code from a tweet and embed it online, and it has the Twitter furniture, and in fact Twitter terms and conditions say you have to do that. When we talk to journalists, they will say, we'll ask permission if we're going to take it down from Twitter, but we won't ask permission if we just embed a tweet. Now I think there's an interesting moral situation here, which is for example, people having their tweets taken and their photos taken, but not knowing, because Twitter doesn't have an inbuilt alert that says, Claire Wardle, your tweet from Perugia has been embedded on the Guardian website. So I don't know that my content has been embedded on there. And I think that's a really interesting place about people say, we don't need permission because we're just embedding, but you are taking somebody's content and moving it and putting it on a distribution site. So, I don't know if Matteo had some points about that.
Sì, sotto quest'ultimo aspetto è proprio un esempio di quello di cui parlavamo prima, cioè l'acquisto di un diritto di utilizzo dell'opera a titolo derivativo quindi dal punto di vista legale questo è corretto, nel senso che l'utente che ha caricato un contenuto su Twitter ha precedentemente sottoscritto un contratto valido con la piattaforma che consente alla piattaforma poi di ridistribuire il contenuto, quindi quell'operazione di embedding senza poi più ottenere un consenso dalla fonte originale è un'operazione giuridicamente perfettamente valida, eticamente forse potremmo discuterne di più, però ripeto, dal punto di vista giuridico questo è corretto farlo. Volevo tornare invece velocissimamente su quanto prima è stato brillantemente detto circa quella parte di contrattazione, così potremmo dire, che avviene offline con chi ha realizzato il contenuto. Questo è un altro aspetto che non va trascurato, perché è stato fatto anche l'esempio del contratto di telefonia, mi pare, no? Quando sottoscriviamo un contratto di un'utenza telefonica, noi abbiamo poi anche le clausole scritte col font Times 2, piccole, e quindi non possiamo poi in un secondo momento dire non ho letto queste clausole. Sotto questo profilo teniamo anche conto però che il trasferimento di determinati diritti, determinate clausole contrattuali, richiedono un contratto sottoscritto, non possono essere alcune clausole validate attraverso un'accettazione, una modalità di accettazione semplificata quale può essere una modalità online del tipo ti twitto, posso utilizzare la tua fotografia, tu mi rispondi con un sì. Questo è un diritto che può essere trasferito in questo modo, ma altri tipi di diritti, clausole di manleva o situazioni che escludono responsabilità, prestano garanzie, sono clausole che giuridicamente non possono essere perfezionate attraverso forme semplificate come il flag di un mouse o un tweet di risposta, ma richiedono eventualmente un'accettazione con forme più, come dire, solenni. Questo dal punto di vista commerciale o dal punto di vista pratico mi rendo conto che crea una complicazione, ma dal punto di vista giuridico è opportuno sapere che diversamente quel tipo di clausole, quel tipo di accordo non è valido.
Okay, so I think what we've learned there is very much that, giving attribution and giving crediting is very, very important, not only morally but also legally, to make sure that creativity isn't stifled, to make sure that journalists can carry on using this content. But then we also found a lot of situations which aren't legal but coming to ethics and responsibilities that a news organization has towards its audience, towards its staff, towards the uploader. And Claire, do you want to just talk a little bit about those issues that we found within the research?
So there is quite a bit of awareness of health and safety of the uploaders because they haven't been on journalism training courses, they haven't been on hostile environment training courses. And so if Sam goes across, we had some quite serious weather for Britain a couple of months ago. And this is actually a tweet from the Coast Guard to Sky News saying, stop asking people to send you pictures because they're in danger. And there is a real issue here around, for example, Turkey, there are big protests today. There are people who aren't trained in that and they're taking content. And there's a real question about, are you commissioning when you ask people to send you content? So that was a really interesting ethical question that quite a number of newsrooms have thought about. Some worry about it more than others. And just the other thing is thinking about the health and safety of their own journalists. So in newsrooms where journalists are looking at a lot of content from Syria, a lot of graphic footage, there's increasing evidence that journalists wearing headphones in a comfy newsroom in London are starting to experience vicarious trauma. They're starting to experience the in the field would experience. So there's some really interesting research and there's more of awareness now in newsrooms about best practice for rotating journalists and providing them with counselling. So actually we were quite interested to see that health and safety both of the uploaders and their own staff was something that was being considered.
Would either of your organisations have received this tweet? Would you be asking people to send you in content?
Send, no. I mean, I think send, I worry actually about this line between commissioning and sharing. And I think best practice for us is to ask people share, not demand that they send. But we also put out on all our weather call-outs, we put a safety report. We always said your safety is first. Think about it when you share your content, think about it when you record your content. And if I see an image that comes in that is clearly putting people at risk, the people that have either taken it or there's someone in it that's doing something, I probably won't publish it, because I realise a lot of people sending me content aren't journalists and not thinking about their safety, so I think we really have to do something and think about it for them.
Because we're an agency, we don't really have a mechanism for people to send us stuff, but we sometimes ask for contributions for stories, but very, very, very rarely for UGC, because of that whole commissioning thing. We tend to seek what people have already uploaded and through the discovery route rather than assigning things. Also because we don't know what are our responsibilities to those people. If people get injured or killed in the process of gathering stuff for us, then what is our responsibility? And just one kind of case study for that is where we have really had to think about it is in Syria. We were getting live video from people using Bambuser, which was one of the ways to get live video out of Syria. There were times when I could see, we never ever asked people to share with us. You know, we said, if you are sharing, we will see it, but we're never going to tell you what to film, we're never going to tell you where to film, we're never going to arrange specific times or anything like that. I was monitoring things that were coming in, and on some of those situations I could see this person is on this rooftop pointing in this direction. We're not going to use that, because if I can work out where they are, then other people can, and that's incredibly dangerous. And they probably don't know that they're putting themselves in that situation, or if they're knowingly putting themselves in that situation, then I'm not going to touch that either. So.
We also found during sort of the anti-government protests in Turkey last year, and also we have protests in Turkey today, you know, people would send in photographs of clearly identified people doing things that the authorities would really could use as evidence against them. And I won't publish that either. I think you just really have an ethical and moral responsibility towards people you deal with.
I mean, Matteo, does this raise also any legal issues, asking people to send you content and they get hurt? What would the ramifications of that possibly be?
Sì, è proprio il distinguo tra chiedere il consenso nell'utilizzo di un contenuto che è già stato condiviso e invece chiedere l'elaborazione, potremmo dire, di un contenuto ad hoc a richiesta. Le due situazioni presentano profili opposti, nel senso che sotto il profilo della proprietà intellettuale di cui abbiamo parlato prima, se io, tra virgolette, chiedo a qualcuno e quindi commissiono un contenuto, potrei quasi sostenere di acquisirne i diritti di utilizzo automaticamente senza un successivo consenso, il che semplifica sotto questo profilo il discorso dell'attribuzione e della gestione dei diritti patrimoniali d'autore. D'altra parte però è chiaro che questo tipo di attività comporta responsabilità molto gravi, perché effettivamente tutti i rischi di cui avete parlato possono ricadere poi in capo all'agenzia che si serve di un non professionista per fare un determinato tipo di attività. Invece nell'altra ipotesi, che io mi sento assolutamente di condividere il vostro approccio, cioè l'ipotesi di chiedere a qualcuno non di realizzare un contenuto ma di poter utilizzare un contenuto che lui già spontaneamente ha deciso di condividere, siamo proprio nella situazione opposta, nel quale sarà necessario poi ottenere un'autorizzazione sotto il profilo autoriale dell'utilizzo del contenuto, ma non siamo sicuramente innanzi a un'ipotesi di commissione del contenuto, e quindi noi non assumiamo la responsabilità per aver commissionato la realizzazione di quel contenuto.
And Claire, I mean, who was it mostly who was, in our research, asking for content of this sort?
It was interesting that a lot of the smaller newsrooms would rely on the agencies for all the foreign content, but they say, but if we have local flooding, we'll ask for user-generated content. So again, those people who aren't working with UGC every day are much more likely to say, send us your pictures, and they haven't necessarily thought through a lot of these issues. So these issues matter if you're Syria or local flooding in Switzerland. So for us, it was a concern about the smaller newsrooms not necessarily thinking about these issues as much.
Yeah. Fergus, Caroline, I mean, have you had people, you've agreed to use their content, you've agreed to give it to your clients, put it on your platform, and then they've changed their mind? They've said, actually, I know you've given me €500, I know you've credited me, I know we've signed a contract, but actually, I don't want it there anymore. Have you had that situation, and what have you done about it?
Yes, I think people do change their mind, and I think if they've got a good reason, then for it to come down, then I would always take it down. I think we have to be fair to people who send us their content. So, yeah, I mean, there are times when I've had a discussion with them and said, are you sure? And we've talked it through and they might have changed their mind back. But yes, if they're very adamant, yes, I'll take it down.
Because of the speed that we're working and the way that we're operating, when that has happened, I mean, it's obviously been a case-by-case basis, but generally, we will have got a legal, agreement to that, and we can't necessarily. We don't embed stuff, so it's gone out to everyone. It's very, very difficult to kill a story, and so that's why we're super diligent on everything, because it's very, very difficult to kill a story. We will probably not run it again, but it's almost impossible to completely retract it at that point. We will take it out of our archive, for example. If they've given us rights to archive it, then that might be something that we can negotiate and take it out of the archive. But it's case by case, and it doesn't happen that often. No. Hopefully, because we've gone through the process and they understand exactly what they're signing up for.
I've had to take a couple of images out of a blog that's already gone out on The Guardian, like 3 weeks before, which left a big hole in it. But it was a security reason. It was about children in Egypt, and they were having to be taken out of Egypt very fast. So, of course, in that instance, you act fast and you take it out.
Yeah, there's, permissions and the way it's being used, or if they think that they can make more money out of it, that's one thing. But the kind of sensitivity of content, there are things that we have to deal with outside of UGC where we make those considerations, and that just falls under that.
Mm-hmm. Is there an obligation to do so, Matteo? If people change their minds, is it tough luck? You've signed your contract, or would the news organization have to respect that kind of moral right?
Sì, allora qui ci sono due considerazioni da fare. La prima è quello che è stato giustamente detto, cioè è impossibile soffocare poi in un secondo momento la circolazione del contenuto. Quello di cui possiamo discutere è la possibilità o il dovere da parte vostra, di bloccare la vostra attività. Poi se quel contenuto viene ritrasmesso da altri, ovviamente voi ne perdete il controllo e non potete avere un profilo di responsabilità giuridica su questa ritrasmissione del contenuto. Per quanto riguarda quello che dovete fare voi, qui ci sono due tipi di risposte. Allora, occorre vedere ovviamente l'accordo iniziale con il quale voi ottenete il diritto di utilizzare quel contenuto. Se quell'accordo è redatto nelle forme corrette, e non ho dubbi per pensare che sia fatto in questo modo, ovviamente non c'è un obbligo di ritirare il contenuto, generalmente. Dobbiamo tener conto però, parliamo sotto il profilo giuridico e non sotto il profilo etico, perché poi sotto il profilo etico uno può dire non ho l'obbligo giuridico di ritirarlo, ma decido di ritirarlo, e questo è un discorso diverso di best practices e di reputazione del network. Sotto il profilo giuridico però resta il problema dei diritti morali d'autore, che sono diritti indisponibili, e quindi noi sappiamo che in determinati contesti, anche se l'autore ha trasferito il diritto di utilizzo di quel contenuto, può in qualsiasi momento esigere giuridicamente che quel contenuto venga rimosso. Sono ipotesi però estremamente particolari, e sono quelle per esempio nei quali l'utilizzo del contenuto a detta dell'autore risulta poi lesivo della sua etica, della sua morale, perché magari quel contenuto viene utilizzato in un contesto che lui considera non conforme alla propria morale. In questo caso il diritto morale prevale sul diritto patrimoniale, e quindi qualora ci fosse anche un contratto con 4 sottoscrizioni e qualunque tipo di trasferimento del diritto di utilizzo, l'autore può in qualunque modo bloccarlo. Però, ripeto, sono casi molto particolari che ci sono. Fuori da questi casi la scelta poi rimane soltanto etica, perché se il trasferimento del diritto patrimoniale è stato fatto correttamente, non c'è un obbligo giuridico di ritirare il contenuto, se non in queste specifiche situazioni.
It's fascinating. I just wanted to come back to something Claire was talking about just before, which is a vicarious trauma. We kind of got two sides on that, didn't we, really? There was the hard, wizened old journalist who said, we've been seeing beheadings for 30 years, what's new? There's nothing new in this. I remember it from Srebrenica, from Sarajevo, etc., etc. And there was those who were very aware that it was something new. the amount of content, the amount of UGC that we're looking at now, the amount from Syria. What side of the fence is AP on this? I mean, do you consider vicarious trauma regarding UGC?
Yeah, as we've dealt with more and more, and it really is, I think, a lot to do with the quantity that people are seeing and being sat, as Claire explained, with headphones on, looking at distressing images. We've implemented a system where you're kind of watched. So if we know someone is dealing with something, we're keeping an eye on them, but also they're not on it for a prolonged period of time. They are rotated through, it now works on shifts, so you do a couple of shifts in a row, that's it. It's not a week or it's not a full-time job looking at this stuff. We've also made sure that in the training that everyone gets before they do a UGC role, that it's very clear that this issue exists and that it's legitimate, and if they feel distressed in any way, they should let us know, and it is completely fine to step away, and we'll facilitate that. And also make them aware of resources available to them. So we've been really conscious because we know that it is something that is genuine.
And The Guardian, is it? I mean, I guess The Guardian Witness it's not quite such an issue for you.
It's not such an issue for us, no. I mean, I think another issue is thinking about the uploader and the conditions of the uploader. You know, when you've sent something to us and suddenly that becomes a real main focus. We got an image sent to us of the incident that happened in Woolwich where someone was murdered. Someone happened to be on a bus and was there 2 minutes after the event. Now, in lengthy conversations with this person actually after that event, he went through quite a lot of trauma around it. And I think it was actually sort of talking it through, and we actually had some awards recently, and the photograph won those awards. And being part of the process and being within the newsroom actually really helped that user. And I think we have to think about their trauma as much as probably we do our own.
So it's as much about the user as it is about the content?
For me, it's both are important. For me, the user is almost more important. But, you know, I'm building a community at The Guardian too, and therefore the user to me is as important as the content, and I don't just want to chase content, I want to look after that user.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to throw it open if there's anybody in the room who has any questions on any of the various issues we've raised here, for anybody?
We'd also love to hear about experiences in other newsrooms.
Yeah, is there any? Please go ahead.
Just one question. One of my experiences with UGC was that people underestimate what it can do to their lives. So we ran a platform at Site Online where people can submit articles, and people got really excited about the prospect of publishing them, but they were really personal stories, and we were excited for them. But then they had 500 to 1,000 comments, and they later said, well, oh my God, I never expected this. It's changed my life, and all my colleagues know about this now. Do you do anything in the environment that you're working in to sort of make people aware of what can happen when you suddenly become famous in that sense?
Everyone's looking at me, aren't they? I think, we do. And that's why it's important to have that relationship with them and to go offline, as we've been talking about, and make sure that they're really, really aware. I mean, I think I still think it doesn't prepare them, and I think, therefore, that you need some aftercare. It's to hold their hands through the process, but come back to them and check they're all right. I mean, we had some fantastic, I say fantastic, it was extraordinary footage of this van almost being washed out to sea during the UK floods. And the person that sent me that footage, suddenly every broadcaster wanted that footage. But the way we dealt with that is we passed it on to our syndication team to syndicate for him, so he didn't feel overwhelmed by lots of people phoning him at home and getting hold of him. One broadcaster did phone him at home. I think he did say to me afterwards, I preferred that you kind of looked after it for me. So yeah, we really do help with that.
I mean, is that something you want to comment on?
I mean, syndication is a huge issue because, again, the audiences don't understand. So they send their little piece of content to their local BBC newsroom, and it gets used by the BBC World Service and their partners in America, and they have no idea. So there's a huge amount of work here to be done around educating audiences. But you're absolutely right. People have no idea what's going to happen, and they can't even believe that their little video of their cat doing something funny will end up on, Comedy Central. So I do think we need to educate journalists about educating the uploaders, because this is a brave new world and they don't understand it themselves.
Which was the organization you were doing this for? Zeit Online.
Yeah, and it was text-based. It was
Okay.
people were sharing their stories, not images and videos, but they were writing articles that we would then edit. So it was an extra layer of complexity, that editing process, changing the text, sending it back to them, getting it signed off. Some people saying, this is no longer my article, please don't publish it that way. Yeah.
How did you deal with it?
You mean the editing part?
The vast number of comments and dealing with the uploader and...
Well, sometimes when they contact us, we like you said, we took the conversation offline, had a phone conversation with them. We explained to them how they can get involved in the online conversation, so what kind of comment they can post, what comments they probably shouldn't reply to. So we help them work through the conversation.
You should write up that experience for others.
It would be very beneficial, I think, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, please, gentleman at the front here. Or, okay, after.
This might be more of a technical question that I don't know if anyone can answer. But you talked about a lot of the user-generated content seems to come from social media and things that are on Google. And as you said, with reverse image searches, you could search anything that's on the web. But really, the Facebooks and the Twitters and Instagrams only really make up about 15% of the entire web. So I was wondering, has there ever been any kind of initiative to go to those parts of the web that aren't seen in the spotlight in order to find content that might be more authentic or more obscure, or things that you don't actually see in the day-to-day social medias?
Fergus is nodding his head there.
There are a couple of issues on that. Unfortunately, the people know where to share. So the majority of stuff comes from YouTube or Facebook because that's where people have started to think, okay, I need to upload it. Yes, we are looking at other places, and stuff does come from those other places, but it's just not as much until they get a bit of prominence. But in terms of getting additional information, the social networks, some of them do strip out information that would be useful for the verification. And I'm just going to use this opportunity to plug another session tomorrow, which Claire is also joining me on, which is run by the Online News Association. I'm leading an initiative on UGC ethics, and we are getting everyone in the industry we can to talk about these issues so that we might be able to say, hey, Facebook, please don't strip this amount out, because it would be useful if you kept it in for us. And this is all of us saying it, because we've identified that this is something that we really need for accurate journalism. So there are initiatives to solve both problems, to go and look for other stuff, but also to try and make the stuff that we're finding better, because it's important for the people uploading it, as well as for the journalists who want to use it.
I mean, just very quickly, though, from a technological point of view, there's very little being done about anything outside the mainstream. And I do think a lot of people from a technological background, if they could work more closely with journalists who have a lot of problems but don't think that technology can solve them, we'd be in a much stronger position. So it would be great if there was more technological solutions to verification. There were things that were just automated, as well as searching for places that we're at the moment, we're sort of blindsided by mainstream, and particularly lots of social networks from particular countries that kind of black holes. So mix it, for example, in South Africa, or what people are sharing on SMS messaging. There's a whole host of very good content being shared in spaces that it's impossible to find or verify.
I mean, to get really technical in terms of verification, there are people working on tools for photos specifically because of the data that comes with it. That what's the term? It's basically called strafing. So, like a gun has, it leaves a unique mark on a bullet. Apparently, cameras can leave a unique strafing mark on a photo that is unique to the actual camera, not the type of camera. So there are people looking into that. It doesn't exist for video at the moment, and I would like to speak to the people who are working on it before the security services in the US start to work with them and shut it down. But we can get really technical on this, and we are looking at it, but it's not really at the stage where there's anything to talk about yet, because it's not that developed.
Because I imagine with a lot of those, with video and photo, looking at the metadata can really help in the verification process,
Yeah.
because it shows, where that photo or image came from when it was first taken. And
The
imagine if
social
there was
networks
more.
rip that out, though. That's what makes it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, on Guardian Witness, we have that metadata actually left in, so it comes in, so we use it, and we absolutely use it for verification purposes. All the EXIF data is absolutely important to us.
Thank you.
The gentleman just here had a question, then I'll come to you. So at the front here.
Let's make a practical example talking about the legal controversies and ethics. Breaking news, for some good pics, you find one, let's say Mr. White on Twitter. You ask permission to share and publish, you get no answer. Case number one, you decide to publish it into credits. Case number two, you don't do it because you don't get any answer. If you publish it, then suddenly Mr. White appears asking millions of dollars. So how do you deal with the issue? It's a kind of private agreement, or you have another way of dealing with it?
Have you had that situation, Fergus, at AP? Or?
We say that we always credit. There is 0.1% of the time when, we always give permission. There is 0.1% of the time where we might have to run something without permission, but with credit, and that decision goes to the very top. The times when that happens are when we know that there's a legitimate reason why we can't get hold of them, not that we don't think that we think that they're going to withhold permission or set extreme terms for use. But it happens so rarely that each case is something that would have to be kind of gone into. I think the best thing to do is not run without permission. I would go for case one. Don't run it.
We had we'll come to you in a second, but we had one example in the research, I think.
Yeah, so AP is kind of belt and braces, so they will absolutely not run with this. Lots of news organisations will go with case one, and they will say, if Mr. White comes back, then we will pay him what he asked for. Always be a senior editor to say, this is a breaking news situation and it's worth it. But there was an example from Tacloban City during the typhoon, where a young man posted an incredible video on Instagram of the typhoon. And if you look at his Instagram post, all of these journalists from around the world saying, can you get in touch, can you get in touch? It's been 24 hours, you haven't got in touch. And somebody else says, he might not have got in touch because there's no electricity in Tacloban City. So, there is this issue about there's a reason people can't always give you permission because they're right in the centre of things. I would love to see social networks think much more seriously about licenses, a kind of a 24-hour license that says if you upload Creative Commons, it can be used. But the idea that 20 journalists say, or 200, can we use your picture, can we use your picture, can you use your picture, and you've just gone through a typhoon is totally insane. But legally, journalists know they have to do it.
Matteo, you want to comment on the legal aspect?
Sì, aggiungo solo una cosa, darò una considerazione legale e non etica, anche perché noi legali notoriamente non abbiamo alcuna etica. Una cosa è il crediting e un'altra cosa è l'acquisizione del diritto di poter ridiffondere una notizia. Il crediting è nel 99% dei casi dovuto. Ci sono dei casi in cui il diritto di poter ritrasmettere una notizia non è soggetto ad autorizzazione da parte di chi ha realizzato il contenuto. Quindi non sempre è necessario che chi realizzi un contenuto acconsenta a che quel contenuto venga ritrasmesso. E sono dei casi specifici, perché sono i casi ad esempio in cui la notizia è di pubblico interesse, è urgente, ci sono delle ragioni di pubblica sicurezza, ci sono eccezioni specifiche alla normativa autoriale che sono presenti sia a livello di normativa italiana ma anche sulla base dell'applicazione dei principi comunitari, nei quali non sempre, per tornare alla domanda che ha fatto lei, il signor Rossi avrà diritto poi di rivendicare milioni di dollari per non aver preventivamente concesso l'utilizzo.
E quindi con la rilevanza sociale io posso rapinare tutto?
Con la rilevanza sociale è un concetto un po' ampio. Occorre la concorrenza di più fattori, l'esercizio del diritto di cronaca, l'interesse nella divulgazione della notizia, deve essere una notizia attuale. Questo per esempio non può applicarsi a una notizia di 3 giorni prima già ribattuta da altre agenzie, non deve essere un utilizzo commerciale della notizia, deve essere finalizzato esclusivamente a una divulgazione di un fatto, una serie di presupposti che devono essere verificati. E questo però prescinde dal crediting che ci vuole.
Yeah, I just want to make an observation that this sounds like a battle that we have with people, you know, journalists, with people who are creating user-generated content, and how can we make sure that one of us doesn't get screwed over? I think that moving forward we should be trying to redefine the relationship as cooperative for the good of journalism, rather than, wow, we can just get away with this. I think we can get so much better content by working with people rather than finding out how we can protect ourselves.
And I think when we set up Guardian Witness a year ago, actually, people came to me and said, we didn't think we were going to get anything. You know, we thought you would get nothing. And actually, people have been really, really willing to share their content. And that's perhaps because of the reputation of the Guardian to make sure that they do look after community and audience well. And that's why they've done it, but also because people do want to share content. And if you do the right thing by their content, they will continue to want to share it.
Okay. I think we've got time for one last question. Just,
Thank you very much for this very, very informative panel. And I have many questions, but I'll just choose one, especially for the content creators here. In what ways do you see UGC affecting the way that we tell a story, if there is an effect at all?
It has, for me, it has this extraordinary effect, you know, particularly with technology these days. Everyone, I say everyone, a lot of people have smartphones. A lot of people are in the place where the news is, where the journalists aren't. And if you get their perspective, it just tells the story in a completely different way, in a way that is unexpected, is new, it's novel. And it's so exciting because we can all take part in the news and the news agenda. So it's dramatic, the difference. For me, UGC is absolutely essential, it's dramatic, and that's why we're having such a serious discussion about it.
I think the key word that you used there was story there, because all of this stuff exists on social networks. If we as journalists, we need to look at how we tell the story, and that's about giving it context. I don't think that if we can't give it context, and it's just we're putting out exactly the same video or photo in exactly the same way that people can see it on a social network, that's not telling a story. So yes, it can really add to storytelling, but as long as we're doing the